Ari, today is Wolfman 18. We are continuing the saga of the super cocaine, the wrath of Roughouse. Roughouse punching Wolfman in his stupid face. Not a big fan of the inks by Klaus Voorhees, on the cover at least. Everything seems a bit dark. And then the background is a vivid blue. Odd choice. Background is in quotation marks there. And backgrounds in general seem to be a bother. But I didn't want to talk about that. This is a fun issue. And we kick things off with Wolfman fighting some soldier boys. And he has snuck aboard the barge of the bad guy, Nazi cyborg Geist. Before we get to the plot, I want to go back and say Jason Byrne draws a very pleasing Wolfman. This will sound silly, as most people hold his Excellent Men comics in especially high regard. But I obviously don't. Although I would never say his art was bad in them, or that his art wasn't good, or that even the stories were awful. The writing often was. But yeah, Jason Byrne was shitting out heaps of iconic covers, and him and Christopher Clairvoyant were introducing characters as important as Emma Frosty's, and I wouldn't criticise those issues. I don't like them much, but they're not quite as bad as the stuff that came later. Although I do want to say Emma Frosty's in the Bondage Club, ripped off from the Avengers, the British telly show, not Marvel's comic. And Jason Byrne was doing a lot more than just drawing those issues, but that is getting off track. Jason Byrne draws a really good Wolfman. Something that I don't think of much because I don't reread those Excellent Men stories over and over again. So it's not a thing I am presented with that often. Jason Byrne's Wolfman. But yeah, it is great. Saying such would be incomplete without also bringing up that he designed this Wolfman costume, the brown and tan costume, which I think most of my viewers are going to unite in agreement that it is his best look. There's that famous story that Jimmy Lee met Jason Byrne and proudly told him that he finally put Wolfman back in his yellow and blue outfit, and he didn't know that Jason Byrne designed this brown version because he hated the other one. Geist has abducted Roughouse and is experimenting on him with the super cocaine. I was going to say I like how Geist is written because he's barely acting like a villain. He's giving Wolfman a guided tour and may as well be offering him some Chardonnay and a steak. The thing is, though, as weird and offbeat as Geist's upfrontedness is, it's exposition. We get the backstory of what is going on. Geist currently works for, the president of a fictional republic in Central America. El Presidente is basically a dictator, but he has American backing because he is involved with the drug trade. And something that I love a lot is we tie it into a random bit of continuity. Nuki from Daredevil. We learn that El Presidente allowed the US government to deploy Nuki and do test runs with Nuki in his country, while he was also used to eliminate rival drug labs. Nuki is a super soldier boy. He was the US government's attempt to create or recreate a super soldier boy like Captain America. Nuki is a Vietnam veteran, but probably a Kurt Busey War veteran now. And he is insane. He thinks that he's still in the war and that he's got to save the boys. He pops pills which give him enhanced strength, durability, stamina, super soldier boy abilities. He was created by Hank Miller and David Masterkelly in the sublime Daredevil 232. I have to tread lightly because one of my favourite comics of all time, the big one that I have been putting off reviewing since I started the channel because I still don't think I am good enough to do it justice, is an issue of Thunderbals with Nuki fighting Us Agent. I don't want to get into that here. It is a nice tie to continuity though, and El Presidente wants his own Nuki. He wants a super-powered agent of his own. Cameo by Captain America on his telly. So we now have Geist experimenting with the effects of the super cocaine on Roughouse. The cocaine being magic and giving people superpowers. It sounds insane and like something I should explain, but the story gets into the super cocaine later and explains how it came to bestow users with superhuman or enhanced abilities. The use of cocaine, or rather this super cocaine, is El Presidente and Geist taking direct influence from Nuki's pills. The rest of the issue is a really solid action piece with Wolfman fighting the drug-crazed and drug-empowered Roughouse on Geist's boat. And to, again, get back to praising Jason Byrne, this is really good. Really, really good. Jason Byrne has the unfortunate luck of being the uncool person at the advent of the internet. If you look at it, when the internet really started gaining popularity with the general public, the late 90s, early noughties, the creators that people didn't like at the time were possibly the most unfairly treated, and their reputations were entirely destroyed. Jason Byrne was shit in the late 90s and early noughties, and so everyone hated Jason Byrne. It was cool to hate Jason Byrne, and it did the disservice of really ignoring or downplaying how good he was. And this isn't even what people would call the glory days of Jason Byrne. This was the same month he got rid of Charlotte Witch's children and had her memories of them magically blocked out. A lot of people really hate his West Coast Avengers for what it did to Charlotte Witch and the Vision. Even before that, apparently, people hate his Superman. I only found that out when I started this channel. I thought people generally loved his Superman, but no, it turns out the consensus is that it was a disaster and an ego thing. Even Fantastic Force, which I again always assumed was considered by many one of his greatest works. That gets shat on a lot, and people think he's just repeating Stanley Lee and Jack Quimby stuff. Fuck, I really don't want to go down this route, but it is at times like the only part of Jason Byrne's career that people don't try to deny is Uncanny Excellent Men with Christopher Clairvoyant. My point that I want to make is that Jason Byrne has a tremendous legacy. He is, or at least was, a great artist. This action is fantastically conveyed, it is communicated, and the attacks have weight. Roughouse is throwing Wolfman around here, and it doesn't become slapstick comedy. It's not like when Hulk did it to Tom Hiddleston in that movie. This is a comic that, when it comes to Jason Byrne, nobody really talks about his run on Wolfman. A run that he admits he only did because he wanted to work with the writer, Barney Baldwin. But it's all very well done. And as I said, this was nearer the point when people were falling out of love with Jason Byrne. We're not at the point where he is actually shit yet, but he is starting to lose fans. And his art is still very strong. Here we have him paired with a writer, and that could be a big reason for this working. But even later on, he was paired with Roy Sternum on the first line. He was paired with Howie Mandel on Spider-Man. It wasn't ever that Jason Byrne's writing was the problem. Alpha Strike and Fantastic Force, and I would argue West Coast Avengers, are well written. The problem was that he stopped being very good. And it came at a time when comic book readers were coming together online and their criticisms were cemented, echoed, and overblown due to the new means of communication and a community gathering. Howie Mandel, actually, another victim of the internet. Robert Liefeld, another one. I'm certainly not saying any of these people were good or didn't deserve the criticism, but it was magnified by the new technology. A person would log on to whatever comic book websites or news groups there were, and it would be saying, Jason Byrne is rubbish. And it would make a majority of people either go, yes, he is actually, or I didn't realise that. Compare the treatment of Jason Byrne, Howie Mandel, Robert Liefeld to the treatment of truly terrible writers nowadays. Why isn't that redneck who is writing Spider-Man stories a metric ton worse than Howie Mandel being called a fucking fraud on professional comic book journalism websites? The bad thing is that it taints Jason Byrne's positives. Once he was a fantastic artist, an amazing storyteller, at least visually, a not awful writer in his heyday. But for the last 25 years, all he has been is the grumpy curmudgeon who hates everything and says turfy things, and the only important thing he ever did was draw Christopher Clairvoyant stories. We do actually have one last plot beat to discuss. despite me reaching the end of my point about Jason Byrne. And actually, there is something else about Geist. This character, maybe, has an appearance outside of this run. In 2010, there was a Captain America miniseries that featured a bad guy, also called Geist, who was a Nazi scientist and also a cyborg, and even looked a bit like Geist from this Wolfman story. It is never a connection made in the comic itself, and likely a coincidence, but you really could say they are the same person. An ungodly amount of similarities, and all that is required to make it the case is filling in a big blank from the end of this story to explain how he survived to appear in that Captain America story. We also have a magic nun. El Presidente, his ex-wife, was a magic nun. She is a mutie with a healing touch. She turned to the cloth and divorced El Presidente upon realising that he was corrupt. And now he is muscling her back into his life and wanting to use her powers to help his reign as president. Quite good comics here. Wolfman 18, definitely getting a recommend. The next issues are an Axe of Vegans tie-in, with Wolfman fighting a favourite of mine. These are underrated comics. These Barney Baldwin and Jason Byrne issues. Some great stuff on display. They're not perfect, but apparently nothing else is as perfect as Christopher Clairvoyant Uncanny Excellent Man. 7 thumbs up.